The idea of organized crime is recent, however. Organized groups with different structures to commit various crimes is not something new. In fact, we could go back a long time. After all, the close ties between organized crime and structures of power and authority were already observed in ancient times. As St. Augustine gave the clearest summary of the problem, for what are states if not great bands of robbers? And what are bands of robbers if not small states? But then how did we get to the great global criminal structures that end up defining the lives of billions of people and the behavior of countries? That's the question we'll look at in this series, The History of Organized Crime. This is the first and most important episode. Throughout the episodes, you'll see how, in the end, everything was connected in one way or another. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with everyone you know. Without your help, I can't keep bringing you genuine geopolitics content. Your support is really important for me to keep working here with you. My name is Geopolitics Mundial, and this is Geopolitics Mundial. What is organized crime? If we look at the law, at least the Brazilian law, we will have a pathetically limited idea of what organized crime is, especially because laws hardly ever reflect reality. In a very summarized way, we would be talking about a group of people who organize themselves to commit certain crimes. Actually, it's much more than that, but our goal isn't to study what organized crime is. It's to look at the history of the most diverse organizations and the main figures behind organized crime. If we take the basic concepts of organized crime and apply them to the past, we will see that there were already criminal structures worthy of being called criminal factions since ancient times. The aristocratic families of early Greece had something in common with the Mafia families of New York or Italy. They accumulated wealth through violent means and fraud. As Solon put it, the leaders of the people grow rich by relying on acts of injustice. Not sparing sacred or public property, they steal and rob left and right. A comparison between aristocrats of ancient Greece and modern mobsters might seem exaggerated at first, but the parallels end up being striking, especially when you look at Sicily and its rural elites dominated by the Mafia. The same applies to ancient Italy. The relationship that powerful individuals had with their communities in central Italy in the early 6th and 7th centuries before Christ, especially regarding their conduct in war and invasion, could be described in terms similar to what organized crime applies today. In ancient Egypt, the so-called bulkoloi caused problems for the caravans of the Egyptian Empire. In the region of Cilicia, where modern-day Turkey is located, the Isaurians tormented and raided settlements along the coast and then hid in the mountains, forcing the Roman Empire to deploy entire legions to hunt them down. This would give rise to the terms praedones, meaning thieves in Latin, and latrones, meaning bandits in Latin. More recently, the so-called pirates during the Age of Exploration, just like today's pirate groups, had everything necessary to be categorized as organized crime, and just like modern criminal factions, they knew they needed to associate with state authorities to maintain their activities. And also, just like today, the authorities used them to fight indirectly against other rival states. But we don't want to go that far because we would risk losing focus. So let's go back to a period that, although not so recent, is still responsible for effects in today's world, the 19th century. The 19th century, which would be the peak of the Industrial Revolution, is by far one of the most important centuries in human history. And almost everything that happens today is, in some way, directly because of the events of the 19th century. We still live under the shadow of the 19th century, and that's why, to understand the world today, we need to look at this particular century. And this is where, in fact, the stories that will shape organized crime in the future, in our days, actually begin. Let's start in the 19th century. In India, more specifically, with a group called the Thuggee, a secret Indian society of assassins and thieves who targeted travelers, with records dating back to the 16th century and operating until the mid-19th century. These bandits operated as gangs of highway robbers, deceiving and then strangling their victims. To take advantage of their victims, they would join travelers and gain their trust, which allowed them to surprise and strangle the travelers with a scarf or a rope. The strangling was done in honor of Kali, the Hindu goddess of death and destruction. The Thuggees were discovered by the British authorities of the East India Company during their territorial expansion in the Indian subcontinent at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. Initially, the thugs were seen by the British as a kind of gang or group of criminals who simply committed robberies, attacked caravans, and murdered people who were considered less threatening or important. However, the British authorities began to learn about the thugs through reports of crimes they committed and investigations carried out by company officials, especially by the assistant magistrate of Farooq Rabat, W. Wright, who was assigned to investigate a murder case in 1810. As the British learned more about the thugs, they began to realize that they were much more than just an ordinary gang of criminals, but rather a secret society with a hierarchical structure, specific ritual practices, and coordination in their attacks on a national scale, something considered unprecedented at the time. This began to worry the British authorities, who were gradually seeing other secret societies disrupting the empire in other places, in other colonies. Thus, the British Empire decided to create specific legal and police measures to deal with the thugs, such as the Suppression Act of 1836. The magistrate Thomas Perry was then sent to investigate the growing number of murders committed by the group known as the Thugs in the Etawah region of India in the early 19th century. Perry offered a reward for information that could lead to the capture of members of the organization, and in March 1810 colonial authorities finally managed to arrest 8 suspects, one of whom agreed to testify against his accomplices in exchange for a pardon. This prisoner, the young Ghulam Hussain, provided general information about the crimes of the thugs, including the fact that there were about 1,500 members of the group living in Etawah and carrying out expeditions to places like Lucknow, Jaipur, and Bundelkhand. In other words, British intelligence had discovered the existence of a secret society that was much larger than they could have ever imagined. And this young man also explained how the thugs committed their murders. The professionals strangle with any part of their clothing and then inflict wounds with a knife. They don't use ropes for fear of being detected. The novices in the art administer datura seeds that deprive their victims of their faculties while they rob them. Hussain also explained how the thugs committed their murders using drugs to incapacitate the victims before strangling and stabbing them. Perry also obtained statements from the other 7 prisoners who had been captured with Hussain, but decided to postpone the trial until he received instructions from the government on how to proceed with this case. However, while awaiting trial, the thug members ended up being released by the Indian authorities, who claimed a series of procedural issues and problems with the way the interrogation was conducted as reasons for their release. Later, it would become clear that this secret society was so powerful that it was even infiltrated among the Indian magistrates themselves. While Perry continued to investigate the group with the help of an informant, he managed to arrest 10 more suspects, still in May of 1810. And as time went by, the British authorities learned more about the thugs. And one of the things they discovered was that their attacks were very organized, and not an act of opportunistic crime. In fact, the thugs prepared expeditions to attack trade caravans and pilgrims. They gathered several gangs of thugs that were led by figures called jemadars, who were the people responsible for planning the attacks on travelers and distributing the loot obtained after the operation. The gangs then traveled through different regions of India, joining with other gangs along the way and committing murders in various locations. They would gather in certain places to divide the loot and then disperse again, thus avoiding suspicion from the local authorities, always using drugs to incapacitate their victims and strangulation with cloths to avoid detection. And just as Indian society was divided into castes, the thugs managed to be a seductive force for the lower castes, or marginalized religions, since the gangs were made up of individuals from all castes and religions, with everyone having equal rights to the spoils obtained during their operations. And the introduction of new members to the gangs happened through family, that is, a thug member would recommend a relative, and they relied on kinship relations in difficult times, with the concept of family extending beyond blood ties and also including close associates. And this was vital for them because some relatives of the thugs were often called zamindars, that is, a type of feudal lord in some region of India. And these in turn gave protection and support to the thugs. They used to choose rich and well-dressed victims, and used various tactics to deceive them, such as pretending they were heading to the same destination or offering protection. The thugs also had connections in villages and markets along the way, which helped them find promising victims. In some cases, they were forced to abandon their cover and attack openly in groups when the victims were especially difficult or more suspicious, like treasure carriers, for example. The British colonizers believed that there were more than 40 different classes of thugs in India and that they were divided into 7 Muslim clans, from which all of them were said to have originated. In addition, the thugs were also made up of members from all communities known as the wandering and bandit communities of India, known as the 84 tribes. Legend said that the thugs descended from 7 Muslim clans and 84 Hindu tribes, with these tribes originally being very close to each other. 2 of their ancestors shared what they stole with all the tribes. After conflicts with local authorities, the thugs, to avoid persecution, supposedly split up and fled, spreading throughout India, which gave rise to the 7 Muslim thug clans. After that, the thugs separated even further and formed more than a dozen different classes, each with its own characteristics and territory. In addition, there were 2 types of thugs, hereditary and occasional. The hereditary thugs were those who considered themselves a kind of thug family, with a long tradition coming from their ancestors, and they were proud to call it a profession. They usually lived in sedentary communities and followed specific rules and rituals. The occasional thugs, on the other hand, were those who did not have such a strong connection to the thug practices and often got involved with the thugs because they felt they didn't have many options in other types of work. They were generally more vulnerable and lived on the margins of sedentary societies, usually as homeless or unemployed people. According to the information collected by the British, the thugs believed that their practice was instituted by the Indian goddess Devi or Bhavani, who helped them dispose of the bodies of their victims. They identified themselves as sons of Bhavani and believed that they should not kill women or members of lower castes, whom they considered to be descendants or servants of the goddess Havi. Some thugs also reported that Bhavani demanded the shedding of blood during their murders, which was interpreted by the British colonizers as a depraved form of human sacrifice. There is not much clear information in this regard, since some reports and documents indicate that the thugs practiced strangulation in honor of Kali, while others did so in honor of Bhavani. The turning point in the English suppression of the thugs came with the appointment of Major William Slyman to hunt them down and put an end to them. By creating a special task force, he led a series of military and intelligence operations to capture and prosecute the thugs. The suppression of the thugs was a gradual process that lasted several decades, but the organization was finally suppressed at the end of the 19th century. The British focus and determination to put an end to the thugs was not for nothing, and it happened for 3 main reasons. The first is that the British Empire did not tolerate the existence of secret societies in its colonies, since they could become future centers of insurgency. The second is that by attacking caravans, they directly hit the coffers of the East India Company. And the third, and by far the most important, was that the British aimed for absolute and unconditional control of the Indian region of Mawa, which was the epicenter of thug activities and, above all, the main area for the production of the opium poppy. The poppy that produces the extremely valuable opium, which would be vital for the British Empire to take its boldest step, the conquest of China, and that would open Pandora's box of organized crime in the centuries to come. Global organized crime is truly about to begin now. Thank you all, I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with everyone you know, and a huge, super special thank you to the channel members who have literally kept this channel going, helping and contributing so I can keep bringing you genuine geopolitics content. Thank you all, and see you in the next video.